Absolute Bane is incredible. He's everything that you're hoping he would be in the Absolute universe in DC. So, what this does is this initially opens up in peace talks, right? Two warring countries, Kahndaq and Kurok. The unfortunate thing about this little bit of a peace talk in the reference of Kahndaq, we don't actually see any reference to Black Adam. Right, that would have been really dope if we got a chance to see him. But where these peace talks are these two countries' leaders, historically at war, finally sorting things out, that as they make their way, or at least get ready to leave, they're met by the arrival of Bane. Now, Bane here is amazing, and tell me down in the comments if you just like read his words in Tom Hardy's voice, because I know I do. But he says, "Forgive me for interrupting, gentlemen. I admit I was genuinely elated when I heard whispers about these peace talks, which is why I was so crushed to hear about their breakdown. When one of you betrayed the other in this very room, killing him and plunging your countries back into war. Which one of you was it again?" And one of them, of course, refuses to kill the other and wants the peace talks to go through. The other says, "I will do it. I will be the one to kill." And so Bane grabs the first guy and crushes his skull with his bare hands. And he does it in a matter of moments. And he says, "Later today, you'll give a speech declaring an escalation of operations. Now, my employers, they know this might be difficult for your people to accept, but they really believe in your leadership skills, Omar, as do I. After all, as students of history, you and I both know there's no real legacy in treaties. In fact, one of my favorite quotes comes from an ancient king from this valley, Sargon of the Akkadian Empire, 23rd century BC. Peace, he said, is the pretty pictures we draw over the ever-warring stars." And he says, "Feel free to use that in your speech today." And then Bane is immediately called to Gotham. Now, at that point, we switch back to Bruce Wayne. And what we get is amazing, because keep in mind, at the end of the last video, or towards the end of the last video, Waylon Jones, right, what you guys traditionally know as Killer Croc, but is a friend of Bruce Wayne's in the DC universe, he had been kidnapped. Now, of course, the only real association between Waylon Jones and the Killer Croc name in the Absolute universe was the name he got as a boxer. He hasn't actually been transformed or become Killer Croc as we would traditionally expect. And so with Waylon Jones missing, Alfred Pennyworth kind of brings in this monologue, because remember, he's not the butler, he's the mercenary training Bruce on how to become Batman. And he says he was supposed to lay low. But I return from my trip to SIS Vohall, and I find him acting like a man possessed. His friend, Waylon Jones, has been missing for 2 weeks, and in that time, Batman has been waging a constant war on Gotham's underworld. I want to tell him to stop, but I know better. What's left of the Maronis, the Falcones, no one is spared. Last night, he took down so many of their people that the hospital actually ran out of ambulances, which is one of the most dope things I've ever heard in a Batman comic. And he says, at which point, they started using ride shares until they ran out of those. There was even a story about one intrepid EMT ferrying the injured to the ER in a rickshaw. And so Alfred says, last night, I finally asked him, "Kid, what are you going to do when you run out of enemies?" Because the one thing that Alfred Pennyworth knows is that Batman going on this warpath in the city of Gotham will not give him the answers he seeks, because the answers come from people who have nothing to really do with the criminal underworld in Gotham. And even if they do, they're using the criminal underworld as cannon fodder. These guys just don't have answers to those questions. And so at that point, you pick up with Barbara Gordon. Now remember, Barbara Gordon hasn't really become Batgirl in the Absolute Batman universe. She may or she may not. We don't really know for sure. Everything's unfolding so different from what we're used to, which is cool. And she's contacted by Batman, right? And he just kind of says, "I need your help." And so the two of them end up meeting up. And so at that point, Batman asks the question, "Where's my friend?" Now, what's really interesting about this is that Barbara seems to have information here, but she asked the question, why? Right? Why do you want me to help you? Because keep in mind, Batman is very much a mysterious figure within the city of Gotham. He's certainly helped good guys, but he's beaten bad guys within an inch of their life. So cops don't necessarily know exactly where Batman stands. But for Barbara in particular, she's also curious here. And that's why she says, no, right? When he says, I need your help because he's my friend, right? Waylon's my friend. Her response is, no, I figured that out. I mean, why me? And he says, because I've seen you in action and you're a good cop. Please, who took him? And she just says, apparently us. And at that point, you switch over to a meeting. Now again, for those of you guys who are new to the absolute Batman universe, most of the Batman rogues gallery that you're familiar with are not his enemies, right? Edward Nygma is a friend. Oswald Cobblepot, who you guys usually know as the Penguin, that's his friend. And so as they're having this conversation, Bruce says that the cops are basically the ones who picked up Waylon Jones. And when the question was asked for why, Bruce says, well, the file says breaking city lockdown, but it doesn't make any sense. Not only that, they learn that the city had already declared eminent domain on all of Waylon Jones' things. And so Nygma's just kind of like, why would the city do that? And that's when Alfred Pennyworth chimes in and says, because he's not coming back. And that's where the question of these guys is like, who in the world is this? Because remember, no one in Bruce's circle has really met Alfred, so they don't really know what to make of him. But that's when Bruce kind of comes to his aid and says, look, man, he's here to help us, right? We need to listen to what this guy has to say. And Alfred tells him, he kind of spills the beans on what he knows. He says, these Arks, as far as we know, there are 12 others around the world. Functionally, they're black sites, but there's rumors of very bad things happening in them. Abominable things. Now, that's also kind of been covered over the course of the absolute Batman run so far. Basically, experiments, right? Turning people into these grotesque monsters or weapons of various forms of destruction. And so that's when Bruce says, Victor Fries said something about that snowfall preparing the city, marking people somehow. Whatever is happening in that place, we need to get Waylon out. Now, again, that was the conflict between Bruce and Mr. Freeze in the last video, Victor Fries in the last video. You should check it out, man. That guy's nightmare fuel. But the snow that blanketed the city of Gotham was a kind of specialized snow that did exactly that, right? It made it easier for the city to track individuals, but to also read their DNA, to find out how their DNA works and whether or not they're best suited for these various experiments. Basically, figuring out who to capture and figuring out who to leave alone. Not only that, everybody kind of turns to Harvey Dent, because Harvey Dent kind of provides this information that people didn't readily have in terms of what's been happening, because he establishes that whatever this is, it's been in the works for an incredibly long time. In the 1800s, there was some kind of hospital on that island. When the place burned down in the 30s, JK Industries bought the land. And that's where Bruce kind of looks over all this stuff and he says, private records show they've been working on the site since, digging, bringing in materials, whatever these arcs are, it all begins and ends with this one. And he says, from what I can tell, the new structure still uses most of the piping and ventilation from the original hospital. And when the question is just kind of like, okay, so like, what does that mean? Bruce says, it means I think I have a way in, but I'll need cyber, Eddie, something that can lock out eyes, lock alarms. Can you manage something like that? And as you would expect, Edward Nygma's offended by that. He's like, really, man? You're going to ask me a question like that? Like, of course I can. Right? Because the best friends are not the friends that help you in a time of need. The best friends are the kind of friends that don't ask questions when you roll in and tell them that you got to find out a place to bury the body. Those are the best kinds of friends. Not that I would know of such a thing. But at that point, the question becomes, what do we do once we have him? And that's where Harvey's like, look, I can get him into witness protection. The instant we get Waylon Jones out, I can get him into witness protection. We have to remove him from the city of Gotham, but we can protect him in some way, because that's really the most important thing here, right? Once Bruce is inside, he can kind of go back at a future point in time, figure out what's going on. But first and foremost is getting his best friend out. Now, Ozzy initially responds and says, better yet, maybe we can all move to sunny Metropolis. Are you listening to yourselves? Do you hear how crazy this is? You're going to break into this facility. You're going to take Waylon Jones out. You're going to put him in witness protection in Metropolis. What is going on here? And at that point, Bruce flips and is just like, and just like smashes the table. Right? He's like, you all wanted me to be honest with you. You wanted in on Batman. Well, this is what it means to be Batman. And that's when Ozzy tells him, look, man, I didn't say that we shouldn't do it. I simply just said that it's crazy. And so what happens next becomes very important, because I imagine it'll be a major plot point going into the future of the absolute Batman comics. What you do is you get a kind of interlude here, where you initially switch over to Bruce and Selina Kyle. And the two of them are just kind of making out and, you know, touching naughty bits on a pile of money, which looks really, really cool. But then Waylon Jones shows up, right? Just starts knocking at the door. And Selina's just kind of like, you know, grab the cash, right? Like, go through the back window, like, get out of here as fast as you can. And that's where Bruce is like, I mean, it's just Waylon, right? It's not like the cops or anything like that. And he's like, open up, man. I got to talk to you guys. And Selina's like, you know, of course you could have just texted us, right? But once they open the door and Waylon comes in, you may have expected a kind of fight to break out because Selina was like Waylon's girl. Not at all. It's a time of celebration because Waylon finally got the fight against Bibbo Babowski. So the whole idea of Bibbo Babowski, this is actually kind of cool. He is the self-proclaimed world's biggest Superman fan. He's like a former boxer in DC. He's almost kind of like a cheerleader for Superman. You don't see him very often, but he's just like a really fun character, right? Well, as a former boxer, of course, this is the conflict that Wayland's talking about. So this is really more of an Easter egg than anything else, but it is a cool little reference. And so one of the things that goes on here is that Wayland asks Bruce Wayne to train him, because while Wayland is a very capable boxer, Bruce is a very capable fighter, and there are various elements from other types of martial arts that Wayland can roll into his boxing style in order to give him a kind of potential surprise upper hand, right? Traditional boxing rules apply, but still, this kind of shows that Wayland has been trained by Bruce in some way, and that's important because of what comes next. Because what ends up happening is Bruce Wayne at that moment basically shows up to Ark M, right? And once he actually gets inside, there's this kind of huge, gigantic facility. It's a compound, right? It's a massive cityplex, right? And that's where Alfred begins this monologue again. And he says, he moves quickly, darting through the maze of waterways. In less than an hour, he's inside the main cavern. 30 minutes later, he's at the old shaft. I guide him up, past bad junctions with dead ends. Higher and higher until he's at the main pipeline, the throat. Then he's in, really in, and for a moment, I fool myself into thinking like him, that this will work, that he can get in and out. But then he calls in. And he says, all right, I'm nearing the entry point. And Alfred tells him, that can't be right, you're too low. And the response of Bruce, I can see the lights, Pennyworth. And Pennyworth tells him, kid, I'm telling you, according to the blueprints, you're still at least 100 meters beneath the prison. And when Bruce finally looks down and sees this place for what it is, the response of Alfred is like, what is it you're looking at? And Bruce says, the real Ark M. And it's colossal in size. It really is a city. It's like something out of paradise, right? It really is just this gigantic city. And so at that moment, Alfred says, a sudden flash of guilt hits me, and I call out to him as he drops in, but he cannot hear me. Why didn't you say what you really wanted to earlier, you old fool, instead of just good luck? So what if it wouldn't have made a difference? You still should have warned him that in England at SIS, you learned your worst fear was true, that everything happening here in Gotham is part of it, connected to the bigger thing, the terrible thing. You should have talked to him because you've been right where he is now. You know what it's like to think that you can save them, but the ones you care about, your brothers in arms, only to find out that you can't, to see them become strangers, enemies. Even now, you remember what it's like to have that faith, to believe the fight is a series of battles, campaigns of strategy, of geography, something quantifiable, because you don't understand yet. You don't see that you've crossed over, that this one isn't a war anymore, but the war, the one behind the others, the one with no rules, the one that never ends, ancient as stone and fresh as baby's blood. You should have talked to him because you remember exactly what it feels like that first time, when you finally see it, when you suddenly understand what you're up against. That moment you look and it looks back, like coming face to face with some ancient beast crawling up through time. For the first time, I hear fear in his voice. I'm not there. No one's there with you in this moment. You're alone. You and the monster. And that is when Bane appears and immediately kicks Batman. And what's crazy about this whole scene is like The Dark Knight Rises on steroids. Batman never had a chance because as soon as he gets up, the response of Bane, go on. It's okay. You can advance now. And Batman launches an attack. And then Bane literally just like blocks his hit and says, Muay Thai, nice. And then touches his elbow, dislocates his arm, like shuts his arm down. He says, it's all right, focus. You have another arm. And then in turn, touches the other elbow. And he says, Suntuken, smart, but incapacitates his other arm. And where Batman's just kind of standing there with both arms immobilized, the response of Bane, look at me, I'm up here. And he says, that's right, you still got your legs. And then like Batman attacks him. And then he touches his knee and he says, Savate, impressive, right? Takes out one of his legs. And Bruce is just like, is that all you've got? I only need one leg to beat the crap out of you. And he refers to Bane as being juiced up. And Bane's response, friend, I haven't even used this stuff yet, but if you want to see what it does, cool. So he literally gets that juice pumping into his head, and Batman gets this complete and total look of defeat, because at that point, he just asks, what are you? And you get to see what Bane looks like in his real form, and he is gigantic. And he just says, call me Bane. Welcome to your new home. Now, let's get you prepped for surgery. Here's my question. That whole, bat-looking thing on the wall, that looks like Dr. Langstrom, right? It looks like Man-Bat. So my question is, are they going to try to turn Bruce Wayne into the literal Man-Bat? I'm curious. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Let me know what you think down in the comments section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.